I've changed the title slightly on my talk, partly because, well, in deference to Derek Massarella, who gave a very similar titled talk about 20 years ago, and I really didn't want to tread on his toes too much. We have our disagreements, we have our lots of agreements too, but without treading on his toes, I've brought William Adams and the story of a myth. There are many myths about him. Today there's only time to go through one, very briefly, and the man. The man relates to the excavation of his tomb in Japan, where I was present, very honored to be so. And of course, in recent times, we have the Nature report, which has detailed this investigation, but not two other critical investigations which have happened more recently. So, a myth and the man. The myth I've chosen, it's the perennial, it's the first one. William Adams was a shipwright. He was apprenticed to Nicholas Diggins, a shipwright. No, he wasn't. Please let me dispel this. Nicholas Diggins, yes. This is the last will and testament of the Nicholas Diggins that Adams was apprenticed to, who was befriended by Adams. They were in contact, we believe, throughout their lives. Certainly Adams knew when the Clove arrived, and Saris told him, "Oh, your best friend Diggins, by the way, he's doing well. He sends you his best wishes." Well, that Diggins is this Diggins. It was the son of another Nicholas Diggins, who is described in his will as a shipwright, but here very clearly in the younger Diggins will and testament, I, Nicholas Diggins of London, in fact Mile End, mariner. William Adams was apprenticed to a mariner, and he remained a mariner all his life, with a modicum of shipbuilding skills. So, having put this to rest, hopefully, with this document, let me proceed into a more anecdotal story, perhaps. Sorry, the slide size is slightly different to the one I imagined. An anecdotal story about his later shipbuilding and ship repairing activities. This is the beach at Kawachi, just south of Hirado, where Adams spent a great deal of time repairing the sea junks he had bought. The little round mountain in the semi-foreground is called Mariyama. That was the abode of temporary shacks, drinking places and so on for the Dutch, Portuguese, English crews who would stop at Kawachi invariably, this place being used as the roadstead for Hirado for ships, while usually waiting for a change of tide and wind to get into the harbour there to dock, and so on. So the place was full of mariners, and it was the beach where Adams, on his assisted purchase of a sea junk, a junk, an Asian junk called the Sea Adventure by the British, by the English. It was the beach to which he brought this new acquisition for careening and inspection for damage. This is an illustration of a later Dutch purchase, 1633, so we're a little bit off for Adams, who was 20 years earlier on his junk, but it shows how both Dutch and the English were looking to adapt the Asian maritime technology to make it suitable for English pilots, English captains, and indeed Dutch captains. So you can see where do I press? Oh, there we go. A bunch of Dutch traders, and underneath assorted Japanese merchants. The crew assorted Dutch and Japanese. In this hybrid junk version, sails have been added of a Western style and a Western rig to see if this made the junk more efficient. In fact, things were the other way around. It was the hull, which was the problem with these junks for Adams. The sailing rig, the Asian-style rig, was very efficient for them. Adams had to beach his ship. He was familiar with this process from a Western-style ship. And so, taking down the masts on the Sea Adventure, he brought her onto the beach, laid her on her side and inspected. He found almost immediately that the planks were rotting. In fact, they needed so much new timber and work doing on the ship that the cost of repairs was equivalent to the cost of purchase of the vessel in the first place. To give an example of the problems they faced, just highlighting this area of the ship, zooming in a little bit, the Western-style structure for a ship design was based around the keel, from which extended a series of ribs, maybe 30 or 40, along the length of the ship, to which were then nailed. You can see these rows of nails going down, where planks were simply nailed to the ribs, and then caulked to make them waterproof. Asian-style junks were built in an entirely different fashion. Without going into too much detail on this one, it's a well-known archaeological discovery in the bay of a Chinese vessel of early origin. It's a really traditionally built junk without any Western influence. And the emphasis here is on the jointing. For example, the superstructure on the junk on the slide earlier was all put together with good joints, as you'd see in any shrine temple in Japan today. In other words, the ship's hull planking was also jointed. It was held together not with nails, but with wooden square dowel pegs, one plank on top of the other. So if Adams is faced with this problem of having to replace the planks, he's got to bear in mind this different construction method. He ploughed ahead anyway with a patch of planking he put on to replace the rotten hull, and almost immediately on setting sail from Hirado on the way to Siam, he encountered a hurricane-force gale, which caused damage and caused the ship to start to sink. Only on reaching Okinawa could he dock, unload all ballast, get to the very bottom of the hull from the inside, and come up with this conclusion from his log. We sought to stop such leaks as we found, but being light, in other words, they'd lit with wax candles the bottom of the hull. Being light, found not many, but certain nail holes, which nothing was in them. In other words, the nails had popped out. He was using the wrong technology. And I use this as an anecdote William Adams, the shipbuilder, well, he soon learnt on this occasion, do not attempt to apply a Western-style patch on a nation problem, necessarily. It works in some instances. Hirado itself, we've seen this map before. I just want to highlight, there is the Dutch factory, the English factory was here, Adams' house was here, with a flag flying at half-mast, the Cross of St. George, indicating when this map was compiled, Adams had just died. We think this is very likely, and yes, flags were flown at half-mast in commemoration of deceased individuals at this time, a relatively new tradition. But it's officially dated 1622, so we're on the ball with what Hirado looked like at this time. The feature I wish to point out is this hill, which is known today as Sakigata Hill, and is associated with the burial sites of foreigners in Japan. And it was to our belief that Adams was buried somewhere here. We also believe not in the English cemetery, which we know was prepared, but most likely on a grave of his, a site of his own choice and selection, a site he'd already pre-prepared in all likelihood. We know he did this, for example, at Hemi, near Yokosuka, which was his own fief. He prepared a site which later became the memorial to Adams, the Anjinzuka at Hemi, which contains not his bones. He didn't die there, and they certainly were not transported across. So where were the bones? Well, near the top of the hill, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this view of Adams' memorial in Hirado, with a memorial to Mary Hind, his wife next door, to his English wife. And beyond that, you can see a stela, a stone without any inscription, which has long been believed by many to be the tomb of Adams, although it's unmarked. Well, in 2017, money came along for excavation. Please, as you look at this, though, note the surrounding area here, the pathway just leading to the top of the hill behind these trees over here, and this area here behind the main monument. What was found with this excavation in 2017 was a grave, a Western-style grave, which had been hacked through base rock. It was, according to the 1931 excavation on this site, of which no other record existed, it was 5 or 6 feet deep. Well, clearly a lot of topsoil has gone from the site since then. But here is clearly a Western-style coffin burial, with in the bottom, still on the 2017 excavation, there were still ship's nails, coffin nails found. All other burials in the site would have been of a barrel nature, where the dead person would be squatting and facing a slightly different direction. The bones were found in an urn, placed there in 1931, I think, 33, whenever the Showa period excavation took place, and were the bones in a very, very sorry state, greatly degraded, subject to acid within the soil, leaving just a few leg bones and fragments of skull. Professor Matsushita, a forensic archaeologist, pointed out the features, and he identified this was a Western burial, a man who on carbon-14 died between 1590 and 1620. My last slide, effectively. What was found in subsequent excavations were a large number of Chinese burials, indicating the site Adams chose had already been occupied. These were discovered in an attempt to find the English cemetery at Hirado, but unfortunately, there was no English, there were no other Western burials.
I'm afraid we have to stop.
Yeah. We couldn't reconstruct his face, I'm afraid, but here, the one facial fragment, his jawbone.